Hi, good evening, one and all. On behalf of National Gallery of Modern Art, Bengaluru, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, it gives us immense pleasure to welcome you all for today's online appreciation session. We are delighted to present this session as part of special series exploring the works of nine iconic masters from the National Gallery of Modern Art collection. Today's session focuses on visionary artist Abanindranath Tagore, a pioneering figure in Indian modern art. As the founder of Bengal School, his legacy lies in reviving indigenous aesthetics and shaping a distinctly Indian voice in modern art. His work not only rejected colonial academic styles but also redefined the Indian identity through art, drawing deeply from classical Indian traditions and cultural narratives. It is our privilege to welcome Ms. Yamini Telkar, an esteemed Indian art specialist, as today's speaker. With over 30 years of experience in the art industry, Ms. Telkar has worked with several prestigious museums and cultural institutions. Her area of expertise span modern and contemporary Indian art, as well as folk art practices. Her recent curatorial work includes the acclaimed art program for Terminal 2 at the Bangalore International Airport, and she continues to consult for leading art galleries and public art initiatives across India. Ms. Telkar holds a Master of Philosophy and Phil in Art and Aesthetics from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, an MA in Ancient Culture from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the JJ School of Art, Mumbai. We are honored to have her guide us through this exploration of Abanindranath Tagore's art and enduring influence. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Yamini Telkar. Ma'am, welcome you again.
Thank you very much.
We are excited to continue from the last session of Jamni Roy, and henceforth we started from Raja Ravi Verma. So here we are today on Abanindranath Tagore. Very interesting. We are excited, ma'am. Up to you. Please take us through the journey.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Darshan, and thank you, NGMA Bengaluru, for initiating this series and continuing it, to bring it forward to people, the subject of national art treasures, something that a very few people, are aware of because it's not something that's oft spoken about. I mean, they're familiar with the artist, but not this whole concept of, uh, you know, what what does it mean, what does it mean when you say somebody's a national art treasure? So to begin with, uh, he's the fourth of the artists that we are talking about. But as has been my trajectory over the past three lectures, I begin by pointing out, or kind of trying to highlight, what is the National Art Treasures. So National Art Treasures was something that was constituted in the year 1976, where initially four artists were given the moniker of being a national art treasure. It meant that their artworks could not be exported out of the country. It meant that they were to be celebrated and recognized as such for having contributed in a meaningful manner to the development of art in India. Because what was being looked at so far was, until that point, was that you had the antiquities, you had classical sculpture, medieval sculpture, miniatures, different forms of painting. But art practice as it evolved, modern art practice as it evolved, was not something that was in the national dialogue. By doing something like this, they highlighted it and they said, these are also assets and treasures of the country, let's celebrate them. And soon enough, it's not possible that there were only four artists who were recognized. There was a second list that was kind of put forward, which was in the year 1979. And in that, there were artists like Raja Ravi Varma, Gaganendranath Tagore, Abanindranath Tagore, Nicholas Roerich, and Silos Mukherjee. So far, so good. Beyond that, after 1975, 79, there hasn't been any addition to this list, which brings up questions in my mind saying that what happened, why is it this process not continue? That's one. And the second thing is, interestingly, though this was something that was considered as modern or contemporary art practice, it came under the purview of Archaeological Survey of India, which again makes it interesting. Why Archaeological Survey of India? Because mind you, by then we had the National Gallery of Modern Art, which was established in the year 1954. So why not the National Gallery of Modern Art, or why not the Ministry of Culture, which at that point was still sitting under the Ministry of Education, but still it could have been a part of that. And also, who devised this list? Who was responsible for coming up these names? So I have my own take on this, saying that this is probably, the brain work of Pupul Jayakar, who was very closely associated with the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, because this was a period when the Congress was the ruling party. And mind you, this was also the time of the emergency. Or there could be another gentleman, Lakshmi Prasad Sihare, who was extremely active as an administrator and leading National Gallery of Modern Art. He was associated with the Archaeological Survey of India. So could it be him? I am just throwing out names and conjectures because there isn't any, documented proof of that. But regardless of all the background or the context of it, what we do have as a nation is that there are these lists of nine artists who are recognized, who are called as national art treasures, and rightly so. Today we look at the fourth artist, which is Abanindranath Tagore. My list that I've drawn up has is there's no, what should I say, reasoning that I've taken the four and then the five. I just went along with what I thought made sense in my head when I talk about their art practice. So Abanindranath Tagore was born in the year 1871. He was, one point of context with the name Tagore, it kind of leads into that, which is that he was the nephew of Rabindranath Tagore, and he grew up in the environment of Jarshankho, in Bengal, which was undergoing renaissance at that particular point in time. He had exposure to culture, literature. He had a very, how should I say, an upbringing that was conducive for anybody to take up art. And there were many people within his family who were either singers, musicians. Of course, like I said, there's Rabindranath Tagore, who was a major figure of influence, and in fact, somebody who supported art in all its form within the family. And that's where Abanindranath Tagore kind of comes into his own. To begin with, he didn't go to an art school, though there was the Government College of Arts and Craft in Calcutta. He trained at home. He had two English tutors who would one Italian tutor and one English tutor. So he had Gilhardy, who taught him oil painting, and then there was Charles Palmer, who would come in to train him in pastels and watercolors. And that was kind of his grounding and training, which was in 1890. But, and then he kind of begins his journey. But before I kind of jump into the whole trajectory of Abanindranath Tagore, what I would like to share, or what I would like to say, is that how am I structuring this talk? So I'll talk about his early phase of life, then how he matured, the breaks that came in, and the turns that happened in his life. I'm marking out these four periods in his life. And the reason I'm kind of saying that I'm going to do about that is because the moment you take the name Abanindranath Tagore, And to all those of you who have read art history or are part of the you know art evolution in India, you know that that name is synonymous, or immediately the first thing that comes to people's mind is the Bengal Revival School or the Revivalist School, because he was the one who was responsible for initiating and starting that particular style thought process of art. And everybody kind of says, oh, that is Abanindranath Tagore, Bengal Revivalist School. And the reactions are very strong and very clear. People either are in awe of his works and think that is something that is phenomenal, or you have the other reaction which says, it was stagnating, it was too romantic, and it didn't connect to the people. What I'm trying to present over here is that yes, he was responsible for initiating a new movement, a new way of thinking about art in India. But there is more to Abanindranath Tagore than just the Bengal revivalist school. So I'm trying to kind of, you know, bring down his entire life, which is almost 80 years, within these. Now we have about what, 40 minutes to take it through and do justice. I don't know whether I'll be able to do justice, but at least I hope that I'm able to expose or bring out the multiple layers that go into the making of the artist, that is Abanindranath Tagore. I cannot even begin to go into the man that was Abanindranath Tagore. So I'm going to pick up key examples of his work and talk about it. So coming back to his initial years, so he trained at home, he was trained in an academic manner, and he was making, and at that time nobody knew him apart from people at home, the close group of friends and family who would interact with them. And then something happens, and how he kind of moves on to the next phase of life, which is the most critical one. I call him the quiet change maker. Some people like to call him the founding father of modern Indian art, but I think that needs a little bit more discussion. So I'm just going to say, why do I call him the change maker? First, itself, the concept of, starting the Bengal Revivalist School. See, there are two names that are used interchangeably for this particular moment. It is either called as the Bengal School, but that becomes, in my head, it becomes a larger umbrella, which includes many other aspects also. But it is also commonly known as the Bengal School, which immediately everybody knows we're talking about Abanindranath Tagore, we're talking about Asif Kumar Halar and other artists who kind of followed the style of painting. But there's also the Bengal Revivalist School, which is there. And he continued to inspire artists even when he was not painting, even when he stopped painting in the Bengal Revivalist School. And he was somebody I think was brave enough to, pick up different styles of work, different mediums of work, and challenge himself. I think that's where his genius lies. And if you realize, this is the image that is also on the cover of the invitation, and this is the first slide that I begin with, because I think there's something so powerful about this image, where it has all the ingredients of what Abanindranath Tagore is really all about. And is only coincident because I didn't tell Darshan what image he should pick up, and he just picked up, or his team picked up this image, and it went out as something that became so iconic. Though there are other iconic works by him, this one becomes that much more interesting. And we can kind of come back to this image if we have time, and see why this image. So, like I said, he was trained under the Italian artist Oliento Gilhardi, Charles Palmer. His initial works were, like this lovely pastel works that he would do. Though this is a slightly later work, which is of his grandson, or he would do landscapes in very English style of landscape where it is the open vista, home, the sky, the how do you capture the world that you see around yourself, and this whole play of perspective and trying to make it look in a very naturalistic manner. So very typical English landscape style that you see in his works. But then there is a change. Can you imagine? Like, there's no transition. You have this kind of work, and suddenly you have this work. This is a work that was done in the year 1897. And the point of inspiration, interestingly, was Rabindranath Tagore. Because Rabindranath Tagore could see that his nephew, that is Abanindranath Tagore, was struggling to, find his voice or find that space where he could, chomp onto something, hold on to something when he was painting. And what did he tell him? He told him that why don't you look at the Krishna Leela, or the whole Vaishnav movement. Like, just to give touch briefly, there's something that is known as the Renaissance in Bengal, or the Bengal Renaissance, where the society was undergoing a lot of change. And this change was also within this change was embedded the whole thing of the what we popularly call as a bhakti movement, or Vaishnav, the Vaishnav movement, which was happening, which was looking at, which of course had been going on for centuries earlier, but was kind of looked at for uh, for the changes that were taking place in society. And that kind of somehow appealed to Abanindranath Tagore. He looked at the Krishna Leela particularly, and he started illustrating them, or he started making paintings based on them. I've picked up two but examples. The one on the left, which is a full scale image, and these are miniature formats, they're all in small paperworks done with watercolors. And what you see on the right is something that is an illustration, an image, a painting along with the text. When I use the word illustration, it does not mean the illustration that you see in magazines or newspapers, but here the term illustration is in the context of the manuscript, where you have an image part and where you have the text part. And this is a series of about 23 paintings that he did in the year 1897. Now, if you look online, the dates keep on varying because there's no signed off date. Some say 1895, some say 1897. But the point is that this is one of the first series of paintings that he did, which kind of gave him a direction, which kind of gave him a vision. And what was that? One, the subject becomes Indian. Two, he's interpreting in based on the literature that is there, but he's kind of orienting it with the miniatures. What is the context, or what is the other things that are happening around this time while he painted this? To give you two examples, there's Raja Ravi Verma, who was painting with oil colors, who was also doing similar kind of subjects, but his were more grounded in terms of oil paint, anatomy, naturalism, whereas Abanindranath Tagore picked up something that was based on the miniatures. And the idea was to find an identity, to find a voice that was not inspired by the West, or the how should I say, the devolving of the miniatures, which kind of had translated into what is called loosely as the company school of paintings, which where there were practitioners in Patna, in Delhi, in in Lahore, and even when you in other two places where in Calcutta, wherever you had the the company, or the East India Company establishing their center. Amongst these two common strong trends, Abanindranath Tagore comes up with a form that was completely different from these two. One which was purely looking towards the West, or one which was a mishmash of the West and what the traditional school was doing. And that becomes something so important and special that people suddenly sit up and take notice and saying that, oh my God, this is something that is so different. And this is also a time, mind you, when the whole thing for nationalism or Swadeshi was taking root in Bengal. You had Bankim Chandra Chatterjee writing Vande Mataram, and that was galvanizing, and the sense of pride was something that was needed. And this kind of work was being, you know, gave a new thought for people. It was not like Abanindranath Tagore started it and said, I want to do it for the nationalism. It comes from his personal desire as an artist to find a voice. And this is also the time when he meets another important person in Indian art history, which is E.B. Habel, who was the principal of the Government College of Arts and Craft in Calcutta, and who had been writing on, art practice in India about, you know, the monuments in India. He was particularly inspired by the Taj Mahal, so much so that he every year from 1903 he came, in fact he came to Calcutta around 1896 as the principal, and immediately he used to write, he started writing articles and magazines, and he wrote books on Indian art. And he was one proponent who said that artists in India need to turn back to their own heritage, develop a style that is associated with that ideals of, making paintings, which was, flat application. It is not about how a flat application of paint. It was not about anatomy, but about how the forms appeared, or how the forms were meant to be. To give you an example, if it was the figure of a deity and a human figure, it did not mean that you had to look at them in human scale. The deity could be bigger and the human figure could be smaller within the same frame. So being guided by the concept and the ideas, kind of moving ahead in that. And that kind of aligned, with the the nationalist movement. And those people kind of supported Abanindranath Tagore immensely. And it was not only Abanindranath Tagore, but his students also started, who were to become his students, also started following this style of painting with their own subjects. Because remember, Abanindranath Tagore was living in Jorshanko. Jorshanko was the place where, they used to have clubs, or what was known as Adda, and the concept of Adda still is there in Kolkata, where you had multiple artists coming in, interacting, talking about it. You had E.B. Howell, you had Kumaraswamy, all of these people kind of coming together, and there was this lot of discussion that was going on. And that becomes the starting point of what is known as the Bengal revivalist school. He made a conscious decision to pick up, painting in that particular style, moved away from the academic realism, and made paintings which looked as what you see on the screen, and dealt with the Indian subject. Which now we come, what I was talking about previously about the whole thing of nationalism, Swadeshi, creating images for that particular moment. This becomes something that's very iconic. Today we recognize this painting as Bharat Mata. It is a representation of, in of the concept of the ideals of what the nation means, or what the country which is identified as a motherland means, in visual forms, so people have something that they can connect with. Is this woman who is draped in saffron, somebody who's not materialistically oriented, but something who's spiritual, who is a giver, because on one hand you see her holding the sheaf of rice. There's the mala which is in her hand. She's educated, or she's somebody who is, the giver of knowledge, and the halo that goes behind her. This painting was made in, again, some say 1902, but it is 1905 in most cases. It was the year when he made this painting as Bangamata, or the representation of Bengal, as the, and as the protector of Bengal. Why was there a need for this painting? Because again, this was the year when the partition of the United, or erstwhile Bengal, was made into West Bengal and East Bengal, or what we call today as Bangladesh. And as a protest and as a form of kind of getting people together and giving them a visual connect, this painting was picked up again by the reformers and they used it in processions. It was printed in multiple books, publications, and it became popular. And interestingly enough, it got the name Bharat Mata in the year 1906, when another important political player, Sister Nivedita, who was a follower of Swami Vivekanand, looked at this painting and said, "This is not restricted only to Bengal, but it is pan India and people should know about it." And it went all out through all publications to a whole lot of people. And today, the moment again you say Abanindranath Tagore to a large population, this is what they understand with. Okay. And it becomes something that gets that, and it kind of is the be all end all of Abanindranath Tagore. But as I want to show you, there's more that happens uh, in the life of Abanindranath Tagore, because he moves on, his practice moves on, and he looks at multiple sources for inspiration. One of the series, what you have over here, is known as the Omar Khayyam's book, The Rubaiyat. He takes that and he uses the subjects to create paintings. And this, particular series is something that he did in after the Bharat Mata. So it was painted, and there are multiple paintings in the series between the year 1905 to 1909. Between that 4 to 5 year period is when he painted these series. And from this particular point on, we will increasingly see the use of, again, another thing which is very common and popularly associated with Abanindranath Tagore, is the wash technique. If I can take you back again, here, uh, this is also a watercolor, but here it is more in terms, you can still see the line, the delicacy of the line is still there, the forms are very clear. But what you see from this phase onwards is almost as if the lines are vanishing away. And that's when the technique of wash comes more and more prominent in his works. Just to kind of give you context of the wash technique, it's not something like in 1905 he got up one day and said, "This is what I'm going to do." It was always, something that he was trying to introduce into his work, but the technical resolution was not there. Abanindranath Tagore kind of arrives at that when he has another interaction with two Japanese artists who were, living in Calcutta. I think they came in the year 1903 or 1904, and they were Yokohama. um I'm forgetting the name, Yokohama Taiken, and there was Sun Sho. There were two artists who came and lived in Calcutta for a very long time, and they exposed not only Abanindranath Tagore but artists in Calcutta to what does it mean to paint with watercolors in a calligraphic manner, in without the use of perspective. And that's where Rabindranath Tagore kind of refines his own technique and he develops it on his own. It's not a direct cut paste from what the Japanese were doing. So he begins, and interestingly enough, he begins by dipping the paper in a in a bath of color. So he would dip them, dry it, dip them, dry it, until and unless he got a particular tonal value that he was looking at. Then he would, it's called as something that is an analyzing or engaging with that particular work. Then he would make the drawings on it, and then again there would be a wash. The whole idea was to do away with the sharpness of lines, to do away with the distinction between foreground and background, and create something that looked like everything was emerging from that particular surface. And then The last part would be coloring. So, for instance, in this painting, the wash, from the orange to the lighter colors would be done first. Then he would compose his picture. He would make, the lines as he wanted to delineate the form. And then he would go in with his brush and paint and add colors as and where required. Yeah. So that was the wash technique, and that was something that was very unique as to what he developed. But he didn't stop over there. He he didn't hold himself onto this, and now things start get interesting. And I would like to keep pointing out to the differences which were there, and what people like to kind of give a stamp and saying this is it, this is all that he did. This is what is known as is the Mughal period, but it does not mean that he's replicating paintings from the Mughal miniatures. But he's reinterpreting different things. And E.B. Havel, like I said, was somebody who was fascinated with the Taj, who wrote many books on Taj. Abanindranath Tagore also does that, and he's created this whole series of painting, um, where it begins with this, which is called the building of the Taj Mahal, and this is the year 1905. But look at the difference over here. Again, go back to this, where this is so delicate and wash and light. Suddenly, not suddenly, but here you see a different treatment. You know, I've zoomed in and highlighted these three figures. It is wash technique, but look at the way he's kind of modeling the figures. Look at the command of composition of this particular figure over here, the detailing which has gone into it. Here, the last step of his, which is like defining the figure, is kind of becoming more and more stronger, because that is what is the need of the subject. If you see, perspective is kind of very clearly, very well defined over here. So the myth is what I would like to call it. The myth that Abanindranath Tagore only did wash technique. He was not concerned for anatomy. He did not look at all those things, is incorrect, because as early as 1901, you see changes in that, or you see he adapts his style as per the subject. So he's an artist who's not stuck by what he's created. He goes by what is required for that particular thing. And I think that is a mark of a genius, to be able to move out of your comfort zone, to be able to move away from what you're associated with and create something that is so different. This, of course, I couldn't help myself, and I had to bring that in, because this is again a very, very popular print of his, which is the death of Shah Jahan, as he's dying, as he's looking at Taj Mahal. We can have a whole lecture just on this one painting as to why it is significant, or what does it signify, what does it mean. Because if you look at it, Taj Mahal, even in the earlier one, Taj Mahal was a small kind of anchor point away. Is the same thing over here, but here he's alone. He's, you know, almost like at his deathbed. What does it mean? Why did he want to show in the decorative inlay, which is over here? The opulence of this, the the distance of the Taj Mahal, and he's like completely given up on everything. There's no embellishment on him as a person. And and of course we know what happened, how his son kind of treated him, what was Aurangzeb's role. And that becomes again a very powerful image. Another famous painting, which is to show that there is a difference, which we see, and the versatility that he has, how quickly he moves from subjects, how he adapts his things. Also, what we should be aware of is that while Abanindranath Tagore was making these works were also being shown internationally. They were being published in magazines which spoke about Orientalism. They were published in art magazines. His paintings were shown in London, in Paris, you know, regularly, because he had the supporters who believed that Indian art practice had more to offer than the phenomenal skill that they had in the craft and the objects that were making. So he becomes kind of a key player in developing this whole identity of art practice in India, which was something that was quite phenomenal, because this is even prior to Rabindranath Tagore, showcasing his works in in Europe and in North America. This again becomes an important point of departure, in terms of how his language becomes stronger. This is again the last journey. It's almost like there's a the it's still 1909. He's not that old. He's he's in his mid late 30s, early 40s at that particular point in time, and how he is looking at philosophical concerns, philosophical ideas to be translated to his paintings. So the other blame which is always put on him is that he make romantic paintings. There's no depth to it. But here I've already shown you two examples where these are highly philosophical, subjects that he paints and he's kind of dealing with in his works. Now I come to this series, which is called as Fagun or the Falgunis. Basically, that is a play that Rabindranath Tagore had written, and it was being enacted within the family, and how the actors would kind of come to life. And Rabindranath Tagore, who was involved in painting backdrops, in creating sets for the plays, make these paintings. This is a series of actors that he's painted, and there's a shift that you see in his works. They become more you know what I spoke about over here, about depth, about philosophical questions, about spirituality that kind of comes into his works, which is also seen over here. And the color palette is also changed. It becomes darker. It becomes the way he's applying paint. I mean, these are images, you don't see it, but whenever you do have the chance and you go to the gallery and you see it, you will realize that there is a denser application of color. So this gravitas that comes into these works. And this particular one I would like to draw your attention to is Rabindranath Tagore, who enacted in the play as a blind singer. And this is the painting that Abanindranath Tagore made of Rabindranath Tagore. Throughout his life, Abanindranath Tagore has made, portraits, paintings on Rabindranath Tagore, because he's been somebody who's kind of inspired him and, kind of guided him through his career. We now come to the 1920s to see the other kind of works that he starts to kind of experiment, or he's already kind of showcasing in a more bolder manner, which is caricatures. There are not many, but there are a few that he does, which are part of illustrations for plays and articles or books that he writes. And the thing of landscape. We began with the landscape painting that he did. And the difference between that landscape, which was more academic, you come to this where it is not so much about the world that you see around, but the mood that he wants to create through his paintings. And that's again an hallmark, that he was not interested in the detailing of, now it becomes a suggestion rather than the detailing that comes into the landscapes that he was doing. The last of the series, or the last major series of his life, is the Arabian Nights. And he chooses again a subject that is not necessarily only rooted in India, but has a more larger and a wider appeal, because the Arabian Nights is something that fascinated people who were interested in what was called then as the Orient, as subjects. And again, you know these paintings are interesting for many reasons, but I'm just kind of going to give you 2 points over here. One, look at the format. It's a square, and anybody who's an artist in the audience will know composing a square is always a challenge, because it can get very dead and heavy and no movement. So that is a problematic thing, but he chose a square. This is almost 10 by 9.5. and the amount of detailing that goes into this each of these paintings is something that is, fascinating. And he reinterprets them without any prior reference into his own way, own narrative. And there are multiple, there are about 45 stories that he chooses to illustrate, from the original stories. And you can see multiple sources of influences within these works, and they're bright and they're colorful. But unfortunately, this becomes something that he stops painting afterwards. So this becomes the last series, because for almost a period of a decade, from 1930 to 1938, even a little later, he doesn't create anything that's prolific. He doesn't paint as much. He turns to writing, he turns to analysis, and he is kind of almost like a document of what is known as the folk forms. He's written a beautiful book on kantha, on alpana, on children's story books. He's written his own biographies. There's a lot of writing that's coming in, but no painting. But he does return to painting, and when he does return to painting, again a completely different way of painting, because this is the 1930 and 1940s when, the there's a new thought process that's kind of coming in, where the question of identity remains, but now they're looking at not at philosophical books or the epics, but they're looking at what the common people understand or the large masses understand, which is looking at the folk tradition. Because this is the time when there you have artists like Nandalal Bose, Jamini Roy coming on to their own. Nandalal Bose was a student, by the way, who had moved on to Shantiniketan and was teaching in Kalabhavan over there. And Abanindranath Tagore again chooses a poem to illustrate, which is the poet. Can't sorry, the name is, I can't see the name, but you guys can read it. And he chooses various episodes to be painted. And again, the style is more freer. There isn't how should I say, the desire to bring in wash technique. You see more of lines. It's more of movement is quite strong in these works, and they're very spontaneous, is what you can see. And there's, within that, you also see things like animals, which is there, and how he interweaves those in different styles. So here it becomes a little, the lion is more stylized, but the porcupine is almost like a life study that he would have done. And it's almost like he's obviously moved away from the whole the weight of the Bengal revivalist, to create something that was more relevant to the times that he was kind of living around with. And there's so much of energy within these works, which also, these are not necessarily all from the later period. The rhinoceros is later period, but all through his time, the animals were constantly something that he painted. The peacock is, the NGMA has these beautiful collection of works, which are the peacock series. The birds are there, or this animal, monkey and the goat. So he didn't hold himself out saying that, oh, I can't paint anything, but he painted everything that came across, connected, resonated with him, because he was also somebody who wrote. He was somebody who was surrounded by poetry. He was somebody who was part of stage. You know and he let all of that kind of come through his work, and he expressed them in as many styles as possible. And I think that's his strength, to be able to express himself in myriad styles and not be bound by one particular thing. And the last thing, the last phase of his life, this is in the 40s, when he does something even more interesting. And this is the time when he was in 1941, after Rabindranath Tagore passed away. He became the chancellor for Shantiniketan, and he would constantly be going there and living there. And I think that had an impact. These are sculptures which are known as Katum Kutum. Katum Kutum, there's, it's a Bengali thing where you call it as. relative form, and how you build something out of it. So these are all what we call as found objects. It is one of the earliest ones to kind of use twigs, pieces of fabric, stone, cord, and make sculptures out of it. So over here it is called as a camel with a bedouin, and this one is an eagle. So what we call as um, trees, dead trees, kind of taking in and seeing forms in them and making it into sculptures. So I think that is something again that is fascinating. This unfold, I don't think the NGMA has a collection of these, or if they have, I didn't see an image, but these are there in Shantiniketan, and you would see them over there, and they're, I think, amazing works. I couldn't find enough images to kind of include it here, but you can look at that. I would like to end by taking you guys a little bit back in time. It's not a linear lecture, but kind of going all over the place back and forth, just so that we can understand what he was as an artist. I would like to end the presentation by showing these two images. This one, of course, is called Mask of Rabindranath Tagore, and done in the year 1929, fairly late in his life. Rabindranath Tagore, Abanindranath Tagore himself, calls these the masks, and he calls them the mask portraits. And he's done about close to 100. I mean, at least 60 to 70 or are there of the family members, and there are others. And the reason he calls them masks, of course, is a thought that everybody today is quite familiar with, saying that this is when people interact with each other, whether it's family or outside, you never know their true face. You never know their true self because they're always with a mask on it. And that is what is something that interests me. And again, this comes from a play that he was working with, and he wanted to create, he had to create backdrops and props for it, and that's where it started. And each one of these masks are in different styles, and this one is what he's done for Rabindranath Tagore. And for me, it was something that was very interesting because he's understood Rabindranath Tagore as somebody, I mean, who was beyond his time, somebody who was modern, for a lack of better word. Because if you see his portraits, I mean, I didn't include them here. There's a beautiful pencil sketch. There's a watercolor rendition of Rabindranath Tagore that Abanindranath has done, or even Rabindranath Tagore as a blind singer in a play. He understands the roles that Rabindranath Tagore has taken. But this is Rabindranath Tagore for him. Somebody who is modern, somebody who is, a citizen of the world, somebody who uh, you cannot really pin down to something, but somebody who stands beyond anybody else. And I think that's what the white, the way its sharp lines, uh, kind of talks about it. Just for a moment, hold this thought and then look at this one. That's his self portrait. The And again, the same here. Here, he, self portraits of an artist are something that are very, how should I say, very sensitive, and they give you an idea of his mind, or how he sees himself, or how he wants the world to see him. And over here, of course, he's aging, uh, and yet he does a realistic rendition, and he leaves, and the brown from which he kind of emerges out like a mask, the subtleties which are there, but yet there is a line which comes into it. I mean, I can go on about it, but the contrast, the the freedom with which he moves from one style to another, depending on who he is making the mask or the portrait for, is something that's quite, I think, amazing. And it tells us that it's a shame that we just restrict him and just talk about Abanindranath Tagore, in a common way of saying that, oh, he was somebody who did the Bengal, who established the Bengal Revivalist School. He was a phenomenal teacher, and he kind of, went on to, create a new style of painting. But it was wishy-washy, it was too esoteric, it was only philosophical, it didn't have much of an impact, it was restrictive. But I think if we look at it in the whole breadth of the work that he did, and the skill, I mean, of course, the skill that he had, and the way he kind of adapted that as he evolved as a person, to the times that were around him. I think that is something that we cannot overlook, and I think we should talk about it more often. And I hope this kind of brings out the genius of the artist, the multiple ways that he worked around with. And for me, that becomes so interesting about Abanindranath Tagore, and we can call him as one of the pioneers of modern art practice in India. With this, I kind of conclude my brief overview on Abanindranath Tagore, and I think we have about 8 minutes for any questions or any observations on the presentation. I know I've been a little fast, but I wanted to bring in you know the the variations of the artist, and hence I kind of wanted to make sure that I got everything in. And mind you, I had even longer presentation, but I said no, I can't do that. I need to bring it down because I wanted to show even more pictures. But then I hope you all go online and look it up because they are all available and you can see them. Or you go to NGMA and you see them, because that's even more joyful. So Darshan, over to you.
I'm just waiting for if anybody has any questions, but not yet.
No problem. I think it's a subject that's so niche, and there's so many new. I hope there are new things that I was able to highlight and bring about. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean, yes, it was. I mean, the very much the points what you touched to, people to understand that he was a modernist. I mean, with the thought.
yeah.
The last few slides were quite interesting and also intense from the perspective how the indigenous thought has changed to a modern thought later on is very, very important. And I
Yeah.
think it's one of the very important times where we cannot forget about it's not only art but entire process of pre-independence and post-independence, the Swadeshi
Correct.
movement,
Correct.
and also I mean, the artist involvement and artist reflection of that current times were well reflected through their
Mm,
expression, and I think that is uh, as a whole you can only enjoy through the artworks which are available. That's what I feel. It will take you through the time, get back you through the time from the
yeah.
frames of these artists. That is very, very important. And
Mm,
we are proud that we are associated with the art and also the museum, which has such a very intense and also rich cultural history and heritage, which can
yeah.
seen
Yeah.
by the scales of these artists.
True. Which is a, because just looking at his works, the Arabian Nights, it's you can't just say, oh, he took a sub, he took a story and he illustrated. There's so much more that goes into that. Why did he choose Arabian Nights? You know, why Arabian Nights at that particular point in time? Somebody who began with Krishna Leela, who does so many other paintings, which are the whole movement of Swadeshi, the whole movement of the partition of Bengal, and yet he chooses things like, one, the fascination with Taj Mahal. Yes, he had a co-creator or a person who kind of um, nudged him to look at the Taj, but for him to take it and print, make work on his own, and to portray it so differently. Because the Taj Mahal was portrayed not as was portrayed as something that belonged to the nation. So he's actually responding to the call of the nation through something that was so beautiful, but yet layering it with a personal story. I
True.
mean, to, otherwise it's easy, Say I'll make a beautiful painting of Taj Mahal. That itself would have sufficed. But he chose to, the two things that
He-
you have, one is the building, while it was
And
being built, the power that he had, the courtiers around him, the lavishness which is there, and he chooses to paint a sky which is like, you know, showing you the boundless horizon which is there. And when it is the death of Shah Jahan, there's no sky. The sky is very limited, but you get to see the intricate, inlay work, marble, which is there actually in the Taj, but it's almost like a mausoleum that he's building for Shah Jahan, who's dying, but he's desolate. Like there's no jewelry, no silk clothes. And also he chooses a perspective where you don't see him, and there's one maid sitting like that. I mean, there is thought that goes into making it, and the choices which are there. I think that's what we tend to overlook when we look back. We say, oh, all the things based on the past and Mughal, but are they really Mughal, inspired from Mughal miniatures? If you were to do a comparison, there's nothing of the Mughal miniatures that you see in these.
true.
And then that itself becomes a different story. Like, how was Mughal miniatures looked at? What happens in them? What was the collection which was available for them to look at? So the layerings are many. And then for me also, like from that, where you are so conscious about what your work means and how you're responding towards the social milieu, to the political milieu, to the messaging that you're giving, to do Katum Kutum. It
Yeah.
kind of, full journey that he's done, to say that this is also something that is that means a lot to me. This is also something that I can that I relate to, or this is what my desire is right now. And not to hesitate about it, because okay, that was in the past, and founder, teacher, principal, and then to do something so casually about things like that. So I think that's what I always want to show when we talk about art is, it's not just that one particular style. There's more, and that's the more that everybody should be able to look at. And that's why my focus on showing as many diverse things as possible for him, rather than just sitting with the first part, which is equally fascinating. But I like to have that whole end to end view with all that interest and in changes and new directions that suddenly come in, that becomes that much more interesting, and then you begin to appreciate the artist uh, even more.
And it's more connecting. And also the very interesting part is how an artist, only remained as an artist with all the sensibility and having the layers in their artwork,
Yeah.
very submittively, very subtly having the expression which is very sensitive, and also to
Mm.
embrace all kinds of medium to their artwork,
Mm.
which will only resonate their own style of art, whatever material is there. I mean, we see that. uh, I think there was a depth in the thought and reflection from that generation, which also, we see that reflection of their value towards the independence India and the change was
Mm.
very much close to them. I mean, within, it adds depth which reflects through the work which we learn. So on this note, I want to ask you, what is that, you want to, uh, you know, give a thought to the younger artists and art enthusiasts for their practice and their philosophy of today's evolving India.
Mm. That's a I think it's a difficult question to answer, especially when you say younger, because artists also have, what? How do you define a younger artist, or what is it that they want to do? I think they're very self-aware, which is, which is a good thing to have amongst them. But at the same time, I think paying a little bit more attention to, the technicalities is also something that is needed, and that cannot be overlooked. And at the same time, I think they should not take themselves so seriously and be so self-involved. There's more there's that they should be able to look at, and engage with. And I think these are very general statements, but suddenly you've asked me something like I have to move from Abanindranath to go where I'm still kind of, my thoughts are churning in that direction to say, what is it that younger artists should do? It's always very difficult to
I
guide
mean,
the younger generation.
I had certain relevance when I asked this question because we see today the fine art practice, the pedagogy has taken a little step back, I believe. That is what
Mm,
my personal understanding says, because the design and the interdisciplinary or the new approach towards the pedagogy has started in a
mm,
very, because I keep meeting a lot of young students from different, whether
uh,
they are from literature or from any other background, psychology, they're always interested in art, and they strongly believe it's one of the interdisciplinary practices they
mm,
want to learn. And when we look at Abanindranath Tagore or any of the any other artist from that generation, or until we were in college, fine art is something where we learn everything. I mean, we also learn design, we also learn a lot of things into it. And when you learn everything, there is no boundary to you. If you are asked to do anything with design, you will do it. That's what we see when you spoke about the Papulkar generation. They looked at all means of art, which which elevated to a stand where artists were also involved. We had certain exhibitions from Vishwakarma, the textiles, where we saw a lot of artists who had also collaborated with the artisans for. So I mean, that was the layer for my question, the last question.
we're done
Yamini,
with the time, no? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, we are
You want
done with the time. So
We can
I'm
still go
curious
on
to
and
ask,
on.
yeah, what is the next one from your end? I mean,
So
what is the next artist?
the next one I want to do is Gaganendranath Tagore, because we are on Abanindranath Tagore. I will do Gaganendranath Tagore, and then we can move on. So
Great. So on this note, it was very pleasant, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And I mean, it's something you start and we get involved. For me, it's always visualizing things. So thank you for
yeah,
that. And on behalf of National Gallery of Modern Art, Bengaluru, and Ministry of Culture, I thank all the audience participant artists and art enthusiasts, who have joined us today. And thanks to you, ma'am, for this. So this will end. Have a good evening. Thank you.
thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Darshan. Bye.
Hi.